So let's talk about Uber and Lyft and just gig work in general versus the states and how Jacobin, the socialist magazine, is taking a look at it. So from the socialist perspective, these are evil companies that are exploiting the workers because the workers have, the article keeps saying, have a precarious situation. Therefore, they can be used as cheap labor, while these companies are just raking in the mega bucks. These rich people are going to be using the services and grinding the workers down. And so this is a very classic, cut and dry uh, Karl Marx, you know what I mean? The bourgeoisie versus the proletariat. But of course, like everything in reality, the reality is much more complicated and nuanced. Now, I think these Uber and Lyft were basically a godsend for the poor people. What before some if somebody wanted to get to work, well, they had to use the public transit or the rail system, depending on the city. But if you like, let's say if you lived in LA, I mean, other than New York, it would take you 3 or 4 hours to get somewhere because they're just the lines were very inefficiently made. And let's say if somebody had a car and their car broke down, well, before the government started, actually, the way before Uber and Lyft, basically had the cabs system, and the cab system was pretty awful. That was the quote unquote government solution that these socialists love, and it was horrible. They had taxi medallions. Only licensed cabbies can pick up people, and people had to. Investors were buying, investing in, on auctioning off these medallions. They're paying millions of dollars, and the driver was actually had to pay to use the medallion. Now, of course, they're making a lot more money, but basically, I think only the middle class and the well-off could use cabs. I remember one time before the cabs got decimated. I think I had Uber or Lyft on my phone, but maybe my phone ran. I was taking a flight. My phone ran out of batteries, and for like a 10-mile ride, I got charged $80 because the cab went on the highway. Some exit was closed, so he went like some back roads or whatever. The meter was running, and with the tip, or it was like 65 or something with the tip, it came out to $80 per ride for like a 10-mile ride. For like, it was the same ride for an Uber or Lyft would be $10 or $15. Now, who benefits? Well, clearly the poor. Poor people use Uber and Lyft a lot, and they definitely benefit these cheap prices. Now, you would say, well, the problem is these Uber and Lyft, they're raking in millions of dollars, but the issue is, I don't know if this author even looked into it, how much money, but those companies are just fighting for market share right now. They are not profitable. Yes, they pay people salaries and stuff like that, but it's basically stock investors, Wall Street, speculators are buying their stock and subsidizing the rides for poor people, for people all around. There is no room. It's not like there's a huge margin. And if you can get the government to pass a whole bunch of laws and make the labor more expensive, well, there's a lot of margin, there's a lot of fat. Like, no, any kind of regulation that would make the labor more expensive clearly would just increase prices. And increase prices, well, the rich are not going to be affected. They're still going to be riding around Uber, Lyft. It's the poor people that are going to be hit hardest. And this is an indisposable service. Now, what are states trying to do, like in California? Well, they used a very blunt instrument called AB5. And basically, they just tried to reclassify all freelancers as much as possible as full-time employees. Now, I was not driving Uber or Lyft. I was a freelancer myself, but I got hurt by this because a lot of the companies, bigger companies that I was working for, they didn't want a lawsuit. They didn't want legal trouble, so they were just automatically creating, making all their freelancers employees, which is a horrible. It's just, before you had real freedom, real flexibility. You talk to a company, you negotiate what they want to pay you per day or whatever, and you do that, and you send them an invoice, and they send you a check. Beautiful, simple. Now it's all this taxes, and you have to fill out hours and all this. They just made it so much more awful, and that's part of the reasons why I moved out of California. I hated that AB5, even though it wasn't even really aimed at me. They were aiming at Uber and Lyft. But anyway, Uber and Lyft created a ballot measure and created a separate category for themselves and got out of it anyway. But now the freelancers, the more like tech freelancers, more high-end freelancers, they're stuck with this bullshit AB5 law. And it's just much better just to leave California and escape AB5. Now, as far as this pricing is concerned, when Uber and Lyft first started, the price was really cheap, really low, like $10 a ride, which was so good for people. It expanded. The like drunk driving accidents went down. Basically, people in a pinch, if their car broke down or something, they can go to a friend's house and they can get a ride. I mean, this is a marvelous service. And how it came about, they came about illegally. There was actually laws about this, but they just did it anyway. And people loved their service so much that the government had no choice but just to, legalize it. But if they followed the letter of the law, this would have been completely illegal. And also, what I like about Uber and people becoming their own, having their own LLC or becoming a contractor is people now actually, they still do pay taxes, but they actually see all the taxes that they're paying. Because the way that our tax system is now, W-2 employees don't see most of the taxes that they pay. Or they just spend the paycheck and they don't even look at the paycheck stub, that like all the deductions. But on top of that, they don't see the payroll taxes that their employer is paying upon them. But now this creates a society actually that's more aware of how much actual government costs, which is a good thing. But yeah, let's get into the article here. November 2020, people of California voted to pass Proposition 22, which classified workers for rideshare and delivery companies as independent contractors instead of employees. Ballot measure was direct response to the California legislature passing the Assembly Bill 5, which classified app-based workers and employees with all the legal protection designation entails just over a year earlier. But this is the beauty. They are contractors. And it doesn't make sense to have a minimum wage with contracting work. It's like, who's responsible for how many rides or how hard you work, for how many rides you take on? You should be, why would you break a system that's not working and that's not broken? The pay per performance, that's a really good incentive. That's a good way to have drivers just keep, staying productive. And also the freedom of people, how you choosing whatever hours they want to work. They want the money, they can log onto the app. If they want to take a day off and, they don't have to call in sick or anything like that. It's pure freedom. It's like work whenever you want to. Why would you try to kludge up the system with the all bunch of laws and regulations? Companies like Uber and Lyft claim benevolence. They argued that AB5 would force them to raise prices and cut the number of workers. Yes, obviously. If not withdraw completely from the state, they wanted to help their workers so much that they spent more than 200 million convincing voters that basic labor rights would harm drivers. Labor experts, activists, organizers collectively warned the public that Prop 22 would set a dangerous precedent for pay and working conditions, but their warning were drowned out by the barrage of corporate propaganda. Big tech even elicited support from some racial justice organizers, which proceeded to make the case that precarious gig workers provides jobs to people of color and is therefore an anti-racist endeavor. Well, it is. When you order, they'll hire anybody, and when you order a ride, you don't know if it's a woman or what the person's ethnicity is. This is the algorithm, completely non-racist. And also, let's talk about. We're dealing with grown people here. Grown people, and if this is like the best job that they can get, then that's if they are driving for Uber, then this is the best opportunity they have. If they had a better opportunity to make more money or more satisfying work, then they would take that. So why would you take away the best opportunity that they have? By what? Having like a $20 minimum wage and all these stipulations and all these if the more this job pays, the more selective they can the Uber and Lyft can become when selecting drivers. Now just almost anybody can just sign up and just be a ride driver. I think there's no limit. But the higher the compensation, then they could just take cream of the crop people. And how would that be good for the people that for like lower skilled people? And if you're an adult, you should be able to calculate how much you make per hour, how much wear and tear is on your car, this and that. It's like you're a grown adult. If you think that this is not worth it, just don't do it. I mean, this is also a good incentive for people to learn a skill. It's like, yes, if you become a plumber or a welder or something, you get paid a lot more than a Uber and Lyft driver. That's the market incentivizing somebody to pick up a skill, to be more productive, to be more helpful to society. You don't want these just anybody can do it type of work, highly paid. You want the more helpful, the more advanced work to be more paid. In the end, gig companies got their victory. They paid for it, and all won by confusing voters. Yeah, so basically they created their own category, and the other freelancers, just the regular freelancers, like the graphic designers, the journalists, or whatever, well, they're just left hanging in the wind, stuck with a stupid, their quote unquote employee, and guy have to be paid by the hour. Like, screw that. What if I don't want to be paid by the hour? What if I don't? What if I don't? I want to run my business through an LLC. I have deductions. This is so anti-worker because you're making the worst tax as far as how much money you bring home. The worst tax position possible is you get paid W-2. You get 35-40% deducted out of your check immediately. If you're work through an LLC with the smart tax planning deductions, you can limit your tax liability. But of course, socialism requires everybody pay a shit ton of taxes. So of course they're against that. But which one is it? Do you want workers to make more? Or do you want workers to make less but pay more taxes? One of the most progressive states in the country just had voted the gut worker protections. And it was time for Uber and Lyft and their compatriots to take the show on the road. So Massachusetts State House currently considering Bill 1234, which essentially is a clone of Prop 22. Now the gig companies have shown their hand. Labor advocates are using lessons learned in California to fight for a different outcome. So Prop 22 was framed as a compromise between providing benefits and protections to drivers and maintaining flexibility. Companies would provide training, guarantee a minimum wage, and make available health care stipend to qualifying drivers. This goes into the details. The reason the workers are afforded basic labor protections is that the labor movement secured them through struggle. People have fought, bled, and died to secure these rights for the working class. But these sacrifices mean little to the flexibility and benefits from Massachusetts Drivers Committee. So far, it has raised $17.2 million to pass 1234 in the base state, most of which came from a single $13 million donation from Lyft. And that's what's confusing socialists, I think, because their whole paradigm of oppressor, that's the woke stuff. Their whole paradigm versus the factory owner, the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat, it's kind of shifting, and then they just it's not so black and white anymore. A lot of the people in the future economies are going to be freelance. They're going to be working on their computer, and they can freelance from anywhere, which is beautiful. And so in a sense, they're both both a capitalist. They own themselves and their labor, and they're a worker at the same time. And the paradigm of, oh, you have to, just minimum wages and this and that, it's like, or this heavy taxation to pay for social safety nets and this and that. It's like no, people are going to flee that because people can work from anywhere in the world now. So actually, the taxes, the government, they have to provide a lot of benefits that people can actually feel and see. Otherwise, if they're just living in a highly taxed state, well, what's the purpose? You can work from anywhere in the world. And the whole paradigm is breaking down. It's confusing them. The bill focuses on the creation of implementation of portable personal benefit accounts. Driver for rideshare delivery companies will be able to create those flexible spending accounts, and companies that work for it would fund them. These accounts will be administered by banks, otherwise included businesses, presumably for a fee. In theory, workers can use them for necessary expenses when times are tough. Okay. So Mira Shane is a longtime driver for Lyft, and flexibility means very little to her when the bills come due. Quote, these platforms seem to think that we want more flexibility, but what cannot come at the expense of livable wages. With a low pay we're receiving, many drivers are struggling with necessary costs like childcare, housing, and food. On top of that, we're left without benefits. These expenses add up, and it's nearly impossible to save for the future. Well, I hate to say it, but you need more skills. You need to learn some skills so we can get compensated more. The market is trying to tell you something. The market is trying to tell you that you shouldn't be probably having a lot of kids, and all you can do is, all the skills you have is become a driver. Gig companies have always maintained that people use their apps for their flexibility, not their wages, and that flexibility is not available to full employees. However, the kind of flexibility in work that Uber and Lyft are trying to sell is not a guarantee for their drivers, nor is it definitively exclusive with traditional employment. It's a false choice, meaning to obscure the real reason why the issue is so important to rideshare and app delivery companies. its precautious workforce of individual independents, contractors competing for jobs, and legally barred from collective bargaining for better pay, working conditions means cheap labor. Uh, yeah, well, why can't they just start their own rideshare? You want to pay your workers double or triple, or everybody's a goddamn full-time employee making 25 an hour with full healthcare benefits? Cool. They should make their own. I mean, people put that on the market. See if people want to pay $80 a ride. It's like, what about? Yeah, it's all about the workers, but what about the customer? Because their business model fundamentally relies on the precarity of workers, particularly cynical that Lyft and Uber have decided to make flexibility a social justice issue. And then talks about how after George Floyd, Uber put up billboards instructing self-identifying racists to delete the app. So stupid. Back in California, Prop 22 was able to gain support of 10 NAACP chapters, the California Black Chamber of Commerce, Black Lives Matter Sacramento. Oh my God, yeah. The geniuses here. The message to communities of color, crafted by Lyft and Uber, disseminated through their activist group allies, is that flexibility important for bringing economic opportunities to underserved areas. People have difficulties in obtaining traditional 9 to 5 work, have a chance to earn money in their communities, the argument goes. Never mind that gig companies constantly assert that gig workers mainly meant to supplement income and not replace traditional employment. The unnamed authors of the op-ed in Chicago, Spanish language El Dia newspaper, describes the dangers of forcing employee status on minority drivers. Quote, additionally, residents of South and West Side are among the biggest users of ride sharing. If companies are forced to operate under these arbitrary constricting rules, they would need to put drivers on shifts where demand is highest. That could lead to the same old stories we've seen many times before. Downtown and North Side neighborhoods will get better service at the expense of the South and West Sides. The arbitrary constricting rules, which the piece refers to, in fact guarantees and protections that workers have spent over a century fighting for. Uber and Lyft aren't trying to create opportunities for marginalized people. Although, this came to mind. This is super kind of ironic. Just imagine. I think this is, nobody ever talks about it, but the untold suffering poor people had to endure because of their shitty, shoddily built American cars. I mean, if they were to drive a Honda or Toyota, they would have almost, other than oil changes and just specific, just like regular maintenance, their cars are just bulletproof. But how many people had to spend, how many poor people had to spend their whole paycheck or months without without pay because they're putting all this money to trying to fix their broken Chevy or whatever. And ironically, I think American cars are so shitty where these unions, I mean, they couldn't. That's a topic for. I mean, that's another video. Topic for another video. But they couldn't. The model. They couldn't. They couldn't copy the Japanese assembly line to make quality products for American citizens because of these old unions with their old laws and just so many restrictions. American cars are just shit. So ironic. Where capitalists once leveraged naked racism to ensure access to a cheap and disposable workforce, this time they're using the aesthetic of social justice. I mean, it's like you read this article and you think that nothing but like The only people that are using Uber and Lyft are just like Monopoly Man caricatures with top hats and smoking cigars. It's like, no, poor people use this. Poor people use, and then they benefit from having getting cheap rides. Vina Dubal is the law professor at the University of California, Hastings College of Law, who studies the relationship between the law, technology, and worker precarity. She also sits on the board of the Coalition to Protect Workers' Rights. Okay, you know this is going to be good here. Two things are going on with the organization that say we are committed to social justice and that support economic marginalization of deployed workers. One is questionably that they're often being financially supported by the companies that exploit app deployed gig workers, either directly or indirectly. The second reason is that they don't have a clear theory of social change and therefore do not understand how economic marginalization impacts racialized criminal justice issues. Oh my God, just word salad. Some of these organizations have such limited analysis that they see the issue in silos. They truly believe that neoliberal propaganda that people can pull themselves out of poverty through unpredictable, insecure work. Well, unfortunately, I mean, God, even companies like the Gap or whatever that have like pay workers through a W-2, they too have just a bunch of people that are quote unquote on call, and that's super like spotty employment. Oh, and part of the reason is that a whole bunch of benefits kick in after 40 hours for full-time employees. So what these companies responded to is getting a whole bunch of part-time work. So the unpredictability of work is due to some of these regulations in the first place. In her paper, The New Racial Wage Code, published in the Harvard Law Policy Review, Dubal provides a historical context for the fight over Prop 22 and presents what should be a sobering historical connection. Like Uber and Lyft, early 20th century industrialists campaigned for differential wage regulations and even sectorial carve-outs for minority black workforce, denying these workers access to minimum wage protections, unemployment insurance, workers' compensation, and protect the rights to organize and collectively bargain. Over the protest of many African American workers, civil society leaders, organizations, they succeeded. Well, of course, this lady would never tell you that it's not that they're in an industrial revolution. It's not that these industrials benefited the most. It's the average person that benefited the most, consumer. Just like the internet and computers benefit society, not just like computer programmers. Gig workers, drivers are a majority minority, an immigrant population, slinging them out as independent contractors calls to mind the agricultural and domestic workers who were just carved out for the first labor laws and later the New Deal. The cruel joke is that the capitalists once leveraged the naked racism of the time to ensure access to a cheap and disposable workforce. This time they're using aesthetic of social justice and anti-racism to do the same. For the Coalition to Protect Workers' Rights and other labor rights groups, social justice isn't about putting up an anti-racist billboards. It's about securing real victories for people who are most marginalized in society. The exploitation of workers is a social justice issue, even if it's rarely discussed as such. This is what organizers like make want to communicate to voters. Here's a quote. This is not only about skirting 100 years of labor law, but also 100 years of tax law, 100 years of viability law, where these companies have no liability placed on them at all, and everything is placed on the drivers. part of the problem is why so many drivers are people of color, is because frankly there hasn't been enough done for other industries and other opportunities. And there's the only way to make ends meet is to pick up these type of short money jobs. Yeah, but the problem is these guys are just so dense. Don't understand that. Yes, if you were to relax labor regulations in other industries, there would be more opportunities for people. But if you have such a regulated industry, the traditional jobs, they're so regulated, and they cost so much to employ people. Then if you're paying a lot of money to employ somebody, then you're going to choose the cream of the crop, the people with the most experience, the oldest or whatever. And the only way these immigrants can compete is to actually work for less. Otherwise, if you make them hiring expensible, even this Lyft and Uber gig work or Instacart shit is going to dry up too. The vote no on H.1234 campaign will be outspent by Lyft, Uber, Instacart, and the like. But just California provided a blueprint for big tech to sell workers' precarity as a liberty for the oppressed. Labor rights advocates have a long tradition of struggle that provides a blueprint for how to defeat them. Well, listen, man, we are living the labor market right now. It's the best that has ever been probably in the history of mankind. Everybody needs workers right now. So why are you going after these gig apps? It's beyond me.